Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Marshall, and I am the head of exhibitions and programs at the George Eastman Museum. Welcome to tonight's Future Present virtual talk with artist Sam Cannon. This is the second presentation in our new series, which features early to mid-career photographers and artists who are pushing the boundaries of image making and visual culture today. The series will conclude on Thursday, May 6th, with photographer John Henry, who will discuss some of his past projects documenting athletes, as well as his current project, Stranger Fruit. You can register for that talk through our website at eastman.org. I'm thrilled to have Sam Cannon here with us this evening to take us inside her digitally altered worlds that blend fantasy, surrealism, and fashion to create works of art that challenge our perception of nature, the human body, and technology. I met Sam, I think when we were both students at RIT, or we were at least in Rochester at the same time. And since then, I've loved seeing her work evolve over the years. Her work has been exhibited at Art Basel Miami Beach, Mana Contemporary, and Spring Break Art Show. The Impression magazine included her in their 50 female creatives representing the next generation of talent in 2018, and Wired named her one of their 23 photographers you should know in 2019. One of the things that I've always been drawn to about Sam's work has been her ability to create art that utilizes digital platforms to create unique and meaningful experiences with her audience. So with that in mind, tonight's format will be a little different than what we normally do. Sam will take us through her work for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then she'll do a live green screen performance inspired by the Serpentine dance, featuring music by Ben Bailey and dance by Quenton. Ben is a multi-instrumentalist and member of the band Joywave from right here in Rochester, or at least that's where I'm tuning in from. And during quarantine, he's been exploring his own personal endeavors through the project Jacob Asher, for which he's dropped a new single last week. You can find that song on Spotify, and the music video is now on YouTube. Quenton is a musician and dancer whose work explores themes of memory, isolation, fantasy, and desire. Their debut album, Prepare the Body, is available on all platforms under the moniker An Only Child. After the performance, we'll do a Q&A, so if you'd like to stick around to ask a question or hear more from the artist, please feel free to do so. But if you do have questions at any point throughout the talk, please submit them through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll go over as many questions as we have time for after the performance. The chat function is open, but we will not be monitoring it for questions. So if you'd just like to use that to say hello or drop a line, feel free to do so. But please do, if you have any questions, submit them through the Q&A button. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll be putting it on our YouTube channel in the coming week. So if you'd like to go back and watch again or share with others, you'll be able to access it along with our other webinars and video content through YouTube. We have a closed captioning function on Zoom turned on. But if you'd like to turn it off, you can click on the CC icon at the bottom or maybe top of your screen and disable it. And I should note that while Zoom's closed captioning is a great feature, it sometimes is not the most accurate at interpretation. I think particularly some technical language specific to image making. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Sam, who's joining us from her studio in LA. Sam?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me in this virtual space. It does feel like a kind of homecoming, having gone to school in Rochester at RIT. So this is an especially special talk for me. And thank you so much for considering me for the series. I'm going to switch over to my slides. As Nick mentioned, at the end of this artist talk, we have a really special live performance to share with you. So stick around for that if you can. Today I'm going to be sharing some work from the past 8 years, some of it newer, some of it older. Certain projects I'll expand on a bit more, and other things I'm just really excited to show you, but I'll breeze through them a little faster. I submitted to my followers on Instagram a question of what would they like to see in this talk. And one thing that was really overwhelming that I got back from that question was wanting to see my earlier work. I hope that in the grand scheme of things, everything that I show you today is considered my earlier work. But for right now, we can consider my time at RIT and the work that I got to make in those over the course of those 4 years, some of my earliest work as the artist that I consider myself today. The first piece that I wanted to share was a collaboration that I did with another fine art photo student at RIT. Her name is Rice Ming Fan. She is currently in Shenzhen, China, making really beautiful personal work. You should look her up. Rice, if you're watching, I miss you so much, and I hope that we get to collaborate again one day soon. But this piece, which was entitled Milk Basin, was an audio-visual piece that was projected into a basin of milk. Rice and I had filmed ourselves in a tub and then projected our faces into this liquid. And for me, looking back on this piece feels really special because, you know, I think at that point in time, I, like all of my peers, had this kind of feeling of how do you find your own personal style? And I think we were really lucky because we were surrounded by a lot of really encouraging professors who told us to get that out of our minds for the time being, experiment, explore a lot of things stylistically, just don't worry about it right now and make things that you feel really good about. But it's interesting, you know, many years later, looking back on all of the things that we were making at that time. And I feel like certain themes that I've carried through to the work that I make today are very clear from the beginning. Those things involve video installation, thinking about experiential, how can videos live off of screen, how can they be interacted with in different ways. Even things as, you know, specific as using liquid to segment and collage the body. The second piece I wanted to share from that time was also a collaboration with Rice. This one was called Unravel. So this is in 2013, and it was a video documentation of a performance during which Rice and I filmed her face prior and then projected it back onto her form as she was wrapped in yarn, and then we unwrapped her to remove that image from herself. And I think that this common thread of collaborative performance was something that was really important to me then and is something that I've tried to carry through in my work today, and, you know, also with this upcoming performance after the talk. And the last piece from that time that I wanted to share was Spider Performance. This was in 2014, which was my senior year at RIT, and this piece, I think, speaks to the themes of body manipulation and self as both subject and object that I've carried through into the work that I'm making today. After I graduated, I started getting some of my first commercial jobs for New York Fashion Week, platforms like Refinery 29, editorial spaces like the New York Times, and a lot of that work was short form motion work that I was getting commissioned to either shoot in a studio or going on site, for example, going to New York Fashion Week and just gleaning tons of images and editing them together into these short form collages. I was really learning on the ground as I was going. I feel like I kind of got thrown into everything, but I was really, really excited. And because I didn't fully understand the fashion space and didn't have a ton of experience in it prior, I kind of just went in without any real expectations, which allowed for a lot of experimentation without fear on my part, which was really helpful at the time, I think. I also was working full-time as a retoucher right after I got out of school, not at a fashion magazine or for some kind of edgy music platform. I was working as a retoucher for an office supplies company. But at that time, I began thinking a lot more about image manipulation, about its possibilities, about the ramifications for its audiences. So in addition to this type of commercial work that I was making at the time, centered around kind of brighter, poppy, short form images, I was also making personal work at nights and on the weekends that was a little bit stranger, exploring those themes. So these looping body collage GIFs are an example of the kind of work that I was making at that time. These were shown at Spring Break Art Fair in 2016, like Nick mentioned. And actually the piece on the right, which is called Legs on a Pedestal, was the first video piece that I ever sold. And it was sold, baked into a screen, which I think, the idea of how we sell video art, how we create value around it is something that I'm really interested in, and something that has become a larger conversation, I think, amongst digital artists today. The piece on the right is also from that same time period. It's called Rice with Eyes. It's also Rice, who I was collaborating with in school. We were living together in New York at the time, right after we had graduated from school. On the left, it's Self-Portrait in a Bubble. Around this time, I started thinking a lot more critically about the virtual spaces that we inhabit and how the impact that they have on us. This self-portrait collage on the left was inspired by cropped images of young girls' bodies that I would see online. I was really getting a lot of my first commercial jobs because I was gaining exposure through platforms like Tumblr and Instagram. And I started really reacting to the images that I was seeing on those platforms, which on Tumblr, especially at the time, I was really bombarded by lots of images of girls, very young girls, portraits of their bodies that had been cropped in different ways, showcasing just their neck, or just the bottom of their mouth, or just their thighs. And I became really interested in why those images were being made, how they were being manipulated by both the people who were taking them, but also a lot of times other people who were remixing them after the fact and using these bodies as an aesthetic, and then what it meant to distribute and share those images really widely. So thinking about things that are bright and shiny and giving a lot of value to youth. I also, after this, got my first opportunity to take part in an artist residency program, which was at Mana Contemporary in Jersey City. There I started doing a lot of experimentations with self-portraits in liquid, both as still and animated images, like the example on the left, but also as longer form video pieces. But my biggest goal with that first artist residency was shifting away from making digital images and thinking about how I could tell these stories in a physical space in a way that people could interact with. So with that goal in mind, I proposed to Mana that I wanted to make this life-size cast of my own body in soap that would be hooked up to a computerized shower system. The piece was called Self-Preservation. I had a body cast made just of the front half of my body, so it would lie flat on a pedestal, and above the sculptural piece there was a computerized shower system that was hooked up to Instagram and Twitter's API. So when people would post about the exhibition, it would release water onto my form, slowly dissolving more and more of the information of the piece. So I think one thing that I've struggled with a lot, that I struggled with especially early on in my career, was this real disparity that I was feeling between the commercial work that I was making and the personal work that I was also feeling really drawn to. And while I understood and placed a lot of importance on the fact that I should be making both, I was having a hard time understanding how to bridge the gap between them. Other than the kind of technical overlap that was happening, both getting better at making certain kinds of images in both spaces and the tools that were required to make them, I was really craving collaborators who would want to explore these themes with me. And one of those collaborators that I met and started working with a lot was Moses Sumni. Moses and I first met while I was doing my artist residency at Mana. He reached out over email and said that he wanted to make a short form looping piece that could play behind his new single that was going to be released for a song called Lonely World. And when he sent me the song, I really fell in love with it. As an artist who likes to world build and create things that feel really immersive, his music just hit me in this really, really striking way. And I was like, I want to make something longer form than this. I would like to collaborate in a lot of different ways. And luckily, we've been able to do that with our careers over the last few years. Sound is such a critical element to creating an immersive world. I'm the kind of person who I don't really care that much about finding new music constantly. If I find a song that I love, I could easily listen to it 1,000 times over and over and over again, which is definitely helpful if you want to get into making music videos at all, because you will listen to that same song over and over and over again. But Moses's music is definitely the kind that you can listen to nonstop. And we've created more than 16 videos together since this initial video for Lonely World. We created a physical installation together to celebrate the release of his 2-part album, Gray. And I even got to be there for his first late night debut performance on Stephen Colbert, doing the creative direction for the performance. But there's one specific video that I wanted to share with you today, and it's actually the most recent one that we made together during lockdown. It's a performance of song Bless Me, but it's a live performance. And this project was interesting to me because it really changed the way that I think about virtual collaboration. Moses was in his home in North Carolina. I was working remotely, directing him remotely. And then we also, thanks to the kinds of data that we were able to capture during the shoot, using both a regular RGB camera and also a Microsoft Azure Connect, which shoots point cloud data, we were able to send information to a 3D animator who's based in Tokyo, whose name is Luigi Honorat. And Luigi was able to create these really striking 3D animations that I could composite into the final edit for the video. So I'm gonna play a segment of this video for you now.
It's so predictable to find the parable from every tête-à-tête. But when you see the end in every beginning, lessons are all you get. Bless me before you go. You're going nowhere with me. Met you in the wrestling pit. You came when I needed it. A body on top of me to teach me. Stay up past the witching hour. You show me your secret powers. I wish that mine could freeze time. Bless me before you go. You're going nowhere with me. Bless me.
So some other recent work, somewhat recent, but I wanted to share are some additional personal experiments. One of them that you see on the right is another exploration in different ways to package and share video art with a larger audience, something that they can experience in their homes. And that is a piece called Two Bodies in Orbit that I made in collaboration with a company called Infinite Objects. Here, I can grab mine. It's going to be small in the little corner, but you can see these are looping video displays that have the art piece baked into them. And you know, I think a lot about how in creating some of these works, a lot of time and effort goes into something that people ultimately only get to experience on a screen on their phones, which, you know, a lot of times can feel really discouraging to me. So it's really exciting to find different ways for people to experience those things and get to share them in different spaces. I really love working with models and getting to collaborate with people in physical spaces, but I also sometimes will photograph objects as well. When I do, I really like coming at it from the perspective of a puppeteer, and this is a recent example for a brand called Monsieur Gabriel, bringing this, what they call the balloon bag to life, using a lot of kind of traditional puppetry tricks, as well as creating virtual spaces for fashion editorials. This is a collaboration that I did with a really incredible 3D animator named Zolik. I photographed a model in the studio, and then Zolik built out these really wonderful worlds to composite her into. I'm really excited about all of the different ways that people can collaborate through compositing and visual effects and the different kinds of worlds that we can build together. Here's an example of a visual effects driven piece that I did on my own, where I filmed all of these different models in my studio in New York, and then having them on green screen was able to bring them into After Effects, which is probably the program that I work in the most. After Effects is part of the Creative Cloud suite. So bringing them into After Effects and then building out these different worlds behind them. And some other virtual shoots that I just wanted to touch on. This was a piece that was commissioned by the New York Times. This is of the chicks, and this piece was shot with each of them in individual locations due to COVID. Shot all of them through FaceTime and then composited them together into a single piece that could run in the paper, as well as individual portraits of each of them. And a similar approach for this portrait of Kristen Stewart as well. I got a lot of messages afterwards asking what kind of camera I used to shoot her virtually, and it was just screenshots, just you know, Command C to get these images and then retouch them afterwards. And I wanted to take a moment to also share about another type of virtual experience that I was putting together at the start of COVID. It was a video series called SCTV. There is also a really famous Canadian broadcast program called SCTV that I did not know about when I named this, but because this was just going out to my Instagram Live, I don't think there's a huge issue with copyright there. But you know, when lockdown first started in New York, I was really looking for a way that I could occupy myself, give myself kind of this thing to spend all of my time working on so that I wouldn't panic. And I also really missed my friends, and I missed being able to collaborate with people in physical spaces. And I wanted to experiment with the Instagram Live format and kind of push the boundaries of what I was seeing done in that space at the time. Started playing around with digital broadcasting software like OBS and green screen, and having people submit audio to me and seeing what could be made. And the performance that you'll see at the conclusion of this talk is very much a part of that ethos that I made at the time, very much about creating this kind of performative experience in a virtual space. Because I really think that, you know, like with this talk, for example, this feels really generous for me, like you as an audience sitting here and watching me and listening to me tell you about my work makes me feel really good, but I feel like I should be able to give you more. And I think being able to offer these kinds of unique performances is a much more generous thing that we can offer the audience. So these are just some excerpts from those SCTVs.
And then I'll go, and then I'll go, and when I go, oh, oh, ooh, ha, 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 ha. Hey, would you soil yourself with a monster like me? If the good Lord sent you, the good Lord can take it back. Bloom beat into a simple tool, opening without a clue.
And the next project that I wanted to share is a more recent physical installation. Since my time at RIT and the Milk Basin project that Rice and I did together, I jump at every chance that I get to do a physical video installation in the world. And I just kind of started to pick this up in the last couple of years and was getting more projects and more installations, and it's something that I hope I get to do more of soon. But this piece that I wanted to share with you today is called Forest Bath. So far, it's the largest physical video installation that I've gotten a chance to do. It was commissioned by Life is Beautiful Music Festival and Studio Albee Alexander. They asked for us to transform this 35,000 square foot old motel in downtown Vegas into an experience for the festival attendees. And you know, it's downtown Vegas in the middle of the day. It is bright and hot and loud, and there are lots of people. And so we wanted to create a space that could be in strong contrast to that, a space that is dark and cool and quiet, and that can speak to nature, and wanting to make a space that is essentially like a visually guided meditation. So we created Forest Bath, and over the course of the 3 days of the music festival, we had 15,000 people come through to experience Forest Bath. The audio that you heard in that video excerpt of the experience was composed by James William Blades. He was inspired by the sounds of nature, of moving through a space on your own, and also, you know, the kind of healing resonances of the earth. Happy Earth Day, by the way, everyone. And, you know, Forest Bath was inspired by the Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku. It was a concept that Albee Alexander brought to me and asked what I would do with a space with that in mind. And it's an interesting question, you know, asking how we can create a kind of virtual experience, or a digital experience rather, for people that can kind of bring that sense of nature into a space like a motel in downtown Vegas. But we had these 4 large video screen projections. Everyone donned these noise canceling headphones. We were right next to the EDM tent, which was really, really loud. There was a lot of vibration, but people would come in and put on these headphones, and it would immerse them in this really quiet, singular experience as they move through the space. And then we had these real grass knolls for them to sit on in the center of the meditation space, so they could feel the grass under their fingers and the moisture in the air and the smell, and then the projections around them were video collages that I made, both from things that I filmed in my studio and also out on nature walks that I would take, and collage them and piece them all together into this 45-minute audio visual experience accompanied by James's sound composition. And you know, it was really interesting seeing how people interacted with this space. I really kind of expected people to come in and take their phone out and get, you know, their kind of silhouetted, beautiful photo of themselves in the space, and then continue on out into the larger music festival. But people really came in and stayed for a while. There were people who would come in multiple times over the weekend, people who would come in and just kind of close their eyes and not even really take in the visuals and just be in this quiet space by themselves. And I found that really interesting. People who I think go to a music festival are there for very specific motivations that I kind of put on the entertainment that they were going to see and the interactions that they were going to have with their friends over the course of the 3 days. And I think I learned a lot about, you know, are just our need for these kinds of moments of respite and these quiet spaces that we can experience together. And I have one more project that I wanted to spend a little bit more time on at the end together before we go into the performance. Over the past year, you know, I don't know how it's been for you guys, but for me, it seems like personal work has been just as elusive as commercial work. It's been a year of a lot of quiet and stillness, and also all of the like little pieces that I was making in between, and doing all these like little visual experiments that I used to make and share out all the time. They just weren't really doing it for me anymore. I wanted to be able to focus on something for a longer amount of time in a way that I hadn't really been able to over the course of the last few years, both because of like other commercial dedications and then my own ability to focus on something for that long. And it really, anyway, this project was the result of that time spent over the course of the last year. It was inspired by this character, who I would love to introduce you to. She doesn't have a name, but she is a female bass character from a program called DAS, which is used to create characters for 3D pieces. I thought about this character a lot over the course of the last year, actually for longer than that, for like the last 2 or 3 years, and thinking about, you know, characters in 3D virtual spaces as objects to be used, thinking about her as a quote bass female character and the kind of continued perpetuation of this golden ratio idealized body in digital spaces. And over the course of the last 2 years, I have been experimenting with how to bring these digital bodies that I was playing with into the other work that I was making. And the first experiments that I did involved a lot of segmentation, of kind of extruding the form through the 2D photograph and thinking about how they can interact with each other. I knew that I wanted to do something that played around with having someone not know what's real and what's rendered on top of it. In this one, I had to contort a bunch of the different bodies to get the right number of limbs that I wanted into the final image. But none of those experiments really felt like they were telling the story that I wanted to tell. And the story that I wanted to tell was a big story to me. It was a story about idealized bodies on the internet and the way that we interact with them and the way that they make us feel about ourselves, and also about these kinds of, you know, spaces for artists and the tools that we kind of aspire to learn, thinking that they'll help us move forward in our careers, and like dangle these carrots of potential value for work, and just a lot of big questions that were swirling around. And it kind of culminated into this performance that I wanted to do in a virtual space that I started calling to myself, thinking about getting into 3D. And part of that was inspired by the fact that during COVID, you know, I would check in with friends and I would hear them say things like, oh, you know, I don't know, during all this downtime, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos. I'm thinking about getting into 3D. I'm trying to learn all these different tools. And it was just really interesting to me that we all kind of had that same desire to want to learn these new softwares. But then it caused a lot of questions for me about what that would mean for our work moving forward. And in making this project, it also changed the way that I wanted to think about using my own virtual space that I inhabit. So for me, that would be my Instagram. I wanted to treat this space like an actual stage. And so in preparation for the performance, which was going to take place over the course of a week with different images dropped each day, I wiped my Instagram and just left a little teaser of the date to come that the performance was going to start. It was really cathartic. I think after everything that we've been through in the last year or so, I would recommend this. It felt amazing. On the first day of the performance, I released the first 3 images of bass female character in poses 1, 2, and 3, which were all pulled from the DAZ software for free and with pre-made poses. It's also interesting to note that in that program, there are poses that are specific for the female-based characters and the male-based characters. So these are poses that you could only apply to the female character. If you tried to apply male poses to the female character, the limbs would get contorted in ways that didn't work just because of the nature of how the skeletons are mapped in the 3D software. The next day, I shared the first stage of my transformation, which involved going into a studio and just photographing myself in those same 3 poses. It was a pretty uncomfortable thing to make and to share. You know, even though I work in a lot of self-portraiture and share a lot of images of myself, it's still something that is really deeply uncomfortable to me. I feel like part of the reason why I'm so obsessed with how these kinds of perfect body images affect people around us is because they have such a strong impact on me as well. And in making this series, you know, a lot of the comments and messages that I got as I was sharing them were things that were just like, this is the first time that I've seen hips that look like that on Instagram, and that meant a lot to me. And having those kinds of moments of encouragement and connection with other people was really special. It was really powerful to me as it was unfolding. But there were also a lot of messages of people not being able to tell if it was a photograph or if it was a 3D rendering. And I like getting to play with people's perceptions of the space in that way. So there was a lot of like, how did you get the eyes to have that kind of texture? It looks so realistic. The next day, I shared the second stage of my transformation, which involved me getting into full prosthetics and body paint to become the base character model. And then I photographed myself in those same 3 poses again. The day after that, I shared the next stage, which involved having my full body 3D scanned while in the makeup, which resulted in the 3 3D figures of each pose. So at this point, I have finally become this 3D character that I'm obsessed with. But I want to take it one step further. I was really interested in continuing the flip-flop between digital and physical space, back to digital, back to physical. So the day after that, I took it one step further and had all of my figures 3D printed. And these are the resulting 3D prints. And trying to think about different ways to kind of populate Instagram and use it as a form of theater. So each day, as I was releasing these new images, I would also change my icon into the next stage of the performance. On the final day of the performance, I shared this text. For the past year, I've been thinking about ownership and identity in our digital spaces, thinking about how we adapt to new technologies and the stages we all perform on, thinking about how an idealized female form continues to be depicted, circulated, and valued in those spaces, thinking about 3D software's contribution to those ideals and my own feelings of inadequacy, both as an artist and a woman, which seem to have been amplified by social media in this time of isolation. But thinking only got me so far. If I couldn't transform those realities, maybe I could transform myself. I then took the resulting 3D characters and uploaded each of them as NFTs to the blockchain, kind of poking fun at all of the NFT madness that had been happening at the time as well. It also allowed for people to not only view my body in 3D space at every angle. There were no angles that you could hide within, but it also welcomed them to bid on my body and tell me what value they thought I had, what value they thought my body had in this space, and what value they placed on each of the individual poses. And I was really curious to see, would certain poses result in a higher value? Would certain poses result in a lower value? And what does that mean for both myself and for the potential buyers? So all 3 are still up and listed. I haven't sold any of them, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them in the future, but that is where, for now, I have left that performance. So that is all of the work that I have to show to you today. And I really thank you for the time and the space that all of you and the Eastman Museum has offered to me to be able to share this work with you today. I personally am really, really excited for this performance that is coming up next. Quenton is so I'm in my office in LA. It's a tiny little space, but it works for now. Quenton is in my dining room. And in just a moment, I'm going to switch over to that stage for this performance. And then if anyone has any questions for me afterwards, stick around. I'm going to stick around. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you guys more about this work. And thank you again so much. And now we're back.
That was so awesome. Wow. Thank you both so much. And thank you to Ben too for the music. That was so cool.
Thank you so much, Ben. This was awesome.
And a lot of people are sending in their thank yous, and they're mesmerized, blown away, beautiful, extraordinary, brave, very cool. So I'm actually there's a few questions that have come in already, and for anybody that has questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A button. That way I can track them more easily. I want to start with a question just about the performance. And maybe you said this, but I missed it, but can you tell the audience a little bit about the inspiration for the dance and the piece? I'm also kind of curious as to kind of like what direction you gave to both the musician and the performer, and kind of how those things came together.
So the piece, actually, yes, you should talk about it in the order that it all came together, because
Sure.
it is not fair for me to say that I came up with the idea and then everyone just executed it. The initial idea started when I was talking to you about wanting to do something more for this artist talk other than just stand up here and show my work, because especially in a virtual space, it is a little bit awkward for me, and I just thought we could go bigger. And then thinking about that, I was like, I love collaborating with musicians. I would love to work with Ben. I also really like that Ben would be able to be in Rochester while it was happening and be able to create a like poetic connection for us to both the physical space between where I am and where you are right now. And I asked Ben what he wanted to do, and he said that he had this harpsichord that he wanted to perform on. And I was like, that seems amazing. Let's definitely do that. And he pre-recorded the audio and sent it to me. And then as I was listening to it, I was really thinking about just, I mean, first off, it's a historical vibe. But I was thinking about George Eastman and the history of photography and film. And then I started thinking about the Lumiere brothers. And then suddenly I was like, oh, this just makes me think of the famous Serpentine dance that was made very famous by the short film that they made of it, but the choreography and the piece itself was made by Loie Fuller. And it's a performance that has been reinterpreted hundreds of times. This kind of big parachuting, billowing dress that she would dance in, and she would have these really beautiful colored gel lights that were projecting onto her that she actually had a bunch of patents for. She's a very she made a lot of technical achievements in theatrical lighting as well, which I think is really incredible. And so I was like, this will be great. Let's do a virtual Serpentine dance. I went to Joann's and bought all of the chartreuse green chiffon that they had and sewed together a big parachute dress, and then asked Quenton, who is a local performer as well, if he wanted to collaborate on it and do all of the choreography and perform the dance in the space. And luckily, he is here, so we can do this together live rather than pre-recording it and streaming it out as well. So this is a unique thing that only happened in this space for all of you, which I think is a really cool thing that we got to experience together.
Yeah, I'm blown away by it and very, very excited that we were able to do this. So a question came in that they asked, you keep using the word performance. Do you consider yourself more an image maker or a performance artist? If neither, how would you define it?
I am not great at defining myself as an artist. I never really have been, because I always am just really interested in like trying on a lot of different hats and experimenting in different spaces. But I think honestly, like because of the nature of how we make and share images online now, and how we also share things about ourselves in those spaces, and how kind of everything that we are experiencing in this virtual space is so curated, I think that like anything that happens in that space is potentially a form of performance. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, especially in the last year, just thinking about how we depict ourselves in those spaces. And yeah, so maybe I don't yet feel comfortable or like I have earned the right to be able to call myself a performance artist. I'm really inspired by performance art, But I do consider myself an artist who makes work that is both for and about virtual spaces. And I consider like creating in those spaces a form of performance.
Can you talk about how self-portraiture plays into your work? Shannon says she's followed your art from afar, Instagram, since 2016, and they've always wondered how utilizing your body and form plays into your work. And if utilizing differing body sizes, ages, genders, races, and ability status has ever been something you would be interested in working with.
Oh, interested in is like not a big enough word. Not a big enough word. I think that when we're depicting bodies in general, that's a necessity, like baseline. But when you're talking about self-portraiture, you know, then it becomes more complicated. And I think that's something that I have thought a lot and struggled with over the years is, okay, if I'm making a substantial amount of self-portraits that I'm sharing in this space, whether the motivation for me making these self-portraits is because like it feels important to me that it should be myself, or I'm available and so it's just easier for me to shoot myself and create these experiments. But in doing so, you know, do people know that they're self-portraits, or does it look like I'm only showing this one their body over and over again in this space that I have ownership over and can curate? So that's something that I think about a lot. It's something that I've worried about in the past. But anytime that I'm collaborating with others, I think like diversity in general is really important and something that we have to be aware of and advocate for in the work that we're making. But yeah, it's a really interesting question when it comes specifically to showing your own body.
Thanks for the great question, Shannon. Daniel's asking, on the topic of world building, is the world you're creating with each work different from each other, or do they align in the same universe?
I just want a t-shirt that says on the topic of world building. That's great. I think that a lot of the things are in totally different universes. I think, you know, I at least had the kind of childhood that was very much one where you like go within. There was a lot of time spent imagining and playing pretend, and I think that kind of shows in the work that I started making once I was old enough to use those tools. All of the things that I was making were very much about creating worlds rather than documenting my own. And so I think in general, just like it's escapism, it's making fantasy and getting to go and play in those spaces. And I think sometimes, you know, the ideas connect, but I think more often than not, the spaces themselves all kind of exist in different realms, different daydreams. And also when things are collaborative, you can't really have ownership over that world, you know, then it's a shared space that you're making with someone else. And those are usually like the most interesting ones to enter.
Yeah. Calder just sent a question in saying, thank you, Sam, you are awesome. After school, you said you were kind of just thrown into the fashion world. Were you submitting work to these spaces, or did these spaces approach you to collaborate?
Those spaces approached me specifically because of the work that I was sharing on Tumblr. This was like in 2013 through 2015, I would say, is kind of like the window of time. And I think dating it is important because it was before Instagram video, it was before Snapchat and TikTok, and really the way that people created and shared short form motion pieces were animated GIFs on Tumblr. And so there was this, and I, as an image maker, especially in school, was trying to figure out, like, I'm really interested in still photography, but I'm also interested in motion, and I don't really have a space in the middle where I can make things, especially like short, quick things that I just want to experiment with and get out of my system. And so Tumblr became the space where I was making a lot of those experiments and sharing them, and then started like having those images go out into the world and having people find them. But also the GIF format itself is extremely restrictive, right? Especially then with what the platform could support at the time. These were teeny tiny file sizes. And so I became just really obsessive with figuring out how to tell a story in as few frames as possible with as few colors as possible so that you could compress it all down. And I just kind of like became really proficient at making and exporting and compressing those types of images. So then those fashion brands and lots of different kinds of brands, even outside of the fashion realm, came to me for both, like, I think a little bit maybe because of the following, even though the following wasn't really public information, but more just because of the like technical proficiency in being able to compress things down into that one very specific restrictive format.
Right. Peter asks, so this is related to the, well, you had, so Peter asked this question before you showed the piece about with the NFTs. So just keep that in mind. But so he asked, how do you see the relationship of this new avenue for sharing work as NFTs, particularly that which uses mixed media in motion, and the past avenues with which you have made tangible pieces of video art? Do you foresee pairing NFTs with physical and vice versa?
I mean, there are already tons of people who are pairing NFTs with physical pieces. There's also tons of people who are pairing NFTs like specifically with that kind of screen. Like this screen that I put two bodies in orbit on is the same screen that the artist Beeple, who had the famous $69 million Christie's sale, whenever he was making and releasing his first NFTs, he was pairing them with these screens. It's the exact same company. So I think, you know, that's already a really prevalent thing in that space. But, you know, I've always just been interested in ways that both video artists and performance artists can sell their work and create value around their work and scarcity around it. And I think that this is one really interesting way to think about it. I think it's something that like has blown up in one really specific avenue of the way that people understand it. And I think that can be really distracting, and it can kind of inhibit the way that people understand the actual potential for the format and the potential for how artists can share and make a living off of these works. But I think in general, I think that it's hopeful to see a potential in which work that otherwise would be considered ephemeral and something that people would invest time into but not really have any way to sell it, have a space for that.
I'm curious to know, Sam, what your studio practice is like. How often are you able to dedicate to your practice and balance that with your, I guess, commercial or whatever you want to, your work?
Yeah.
Your personal with your job. Yeah, I guess.
I mean, I don't really do anything else. It's maybe the sadder truth. Like this room, I am in this room 85% of the time, maybe. Even like in my free time when I'm looking for a different thing to do and think I like need to get off of my computer, I'll like put on a VR headset and draw in 3D space. You know, I am a little bit of a hermit in that way. I don't mind just kind of hunkering down and making things for many days on end. And when you work in that way, the lines between like the personal and commercial work really start to get blurred because everything feels like an experiment for something else, you know? So it's not, I don't feel like I've had any trouble trying to like make time to experiment and make personal work, but what I did have a lot of trouble with was making something that was larger than just a single experiment that I was kind of playing around with on that day and trying to see where it could go. And this last performance and image series for thinking about getting into 3D was really like me kind of pressuring myself to invest the time, to invest the money, and like see it through to completion. And it's funny because it like, to me, it feels like a really different kind of practice as an artist, when in actuality, it's just a much more traditional way of going about making work. But I think that says a lot about like the generation that I'm a part of and the way that I was like really kind of chauffeured into making commercial work through being an artist in these digital social spaces. So I think in a way it's almost like I'm kind of unlearning my practice as an artist so that I can relearn something that will be better for me, both in what I'm making and better for my mental health as well.
Yeah. Well, that kind of just like brings me back to that question about like, what kind of artist are you? Or do you have like, how do you define yourself? And I think that there's something, I don't want to say that it's specific to, you know, I would say our generation, we're pretty close in age, but that like, we kind of have to know how to do a lot of different things and to do them well.
Yeah.
And there's an expectation that, you know, any job that you might take on, I think particularly in the creative field, there's this expectation that you're going to be a social media person, and you're also going to know how to edit video, and you're going to know how, like, you have just like this whole array of like tools that you need to have in the creative field now. So I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to like say, well, I'm a photographer, because you have to be so much more than that.
Yeah, and I think it also, I'm not sure that I think a lot about how like social media, for every like benefit that I feel like it's offered me and something that has been really helpful and something that has kind of pushed me to learn a certain thing, there's also like the thing that it has taken away. And so, you know, thinking about before, like trying to understand what my practice as an artist is, like that is reactionary on both sides to that. And I think that's also true for skill sets. Like, because I constantly feel like I need to learn all of these different tools to be able to execute things, it also has made it harder for me to know when I need to, like, I shouldn't do the thing. I shouldn't do that. Like, I can make the green dress, but I shouldn't put on the green dress. Like, that's not the space that I should inhabit. That's a space should inhabit, and then we'll be able to like make a much more beautiful thing together, and also then we all get to share the stage and we get to make things and rise up together, which is really important to me, and something that I think I'm like learning more and more as I get older, that like that's a thing that should be unlearned and something that you know, you would really benefit for. And I think it's true for skill sets as well. Yeah, it's just all of those things, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear there are others out there who are, well, I'm not glad to hear. I don't want to hear anybody struggling with anything, but like,
no, we
nice
should
to know that there are others.
Yeah, no, it's important to say. It's important.
Yeah.
To
Well, and I think with that, what, you know, that mentioning that with Instagram, where there's this like give and take, right? Where I think artists, it can become this daunting thing where you feel like you have to push things out. There's this like pressure to, well, I mean, I'll speak for myself. There's this kind of like pressure to like constantly be creating content, to constantly be getting things out, or you're going to lose an audience, or you might not get the show or whatever. And then sometimes you're just like, me personally, I'm like, I don't want to ever look at Instagram ever again. But then, you know, I generate a lot of my own personal, like that's, you know, getting shows and getting things like that. Like that's where it's happening more there than anywhere else for me. So it's kind of, yeah, it's this, there's good and bad.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I've at least tried to get to the place where like, it's okay to have specific goals for things in the work that you're sharing through social media. But I think I've really changed what those goals are. Like, for me, the goal is not the number of followers. I knew that when I started posting the pieces from that performance that I was gonna start losing followers. That was just like a baseline understanding of what was about to happen. And it did. But also, like, the people who stuck around, real ones, 100%. And also, like, the interactions were much more engaging. I was having interesting conversations with people over messages in this space. It wasn't like, I think whenever I treat social media like a space where I'm just supposed to put things out and hope that like more and more people start looking at me, that's when the work suffers and I suffer alongside it. And I think that's true for most people, I would assume. And I think that also is a really interesting way to think about the potential of being able to like actually sell these individual image assets now, because it's like a really easy thing to eye roll at, and it's something that's been presented in like a really weird way. And there's also a lot of like weird cultural stuff that's happening in the NFT space. But at the same time, like currently artists who are being told that like the only thing that they can do to try to succeed is just make tons of work and put it in this space for free and then just keep moving forward. Like it's a huge burnout machine, and it's a major bummer. And like we need something to try to change that. I don't know if this is it, but I think that it is. Everything that we're seeing around it is a response to that feeling.
Well, and it's just, I think it's like, I don't want to say like in a weird way, like normalizing it. Like, it's like, you can buy these things. Like, this is a form of art collecting, or, you know, having art in your home in this new, unique way, which hopefully will continue. So
Totally. But I will say, out of all of the like digital files from that performance, these are still my favorite. Like at the end of the day, it's still way more magical for me to get to like hold and experience the little 3D figure, which is something that's really novel to me. Like I still only usually get to experience my art through screens. So this felt
wait,
really
will those be with the NFT sale then?
I don't know. Who knows? I haven't actually put any of the pieces up for auction. Like you can go on and make a bid and be like,
oh, okay.
Hey, if I give you this much, can I have it? And then I can choose. But these have never been listed anywhere. They just live here in my office.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so we went a little over an hour, but very, very much worth it, I think. So thank you, Sam. Thank you, Quenton. Thank you, Ben, for all putting together that amazing performance and for sharing with us today. Sam, I'll give you the last word.
Wait, what did we say was on the t-shirt? On the topic of world building.
On the topic of world building. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Bye.